Long time no see.
Agreed.
Yeah. At some point I'll so I didn't get to talk about it there because I didn't want to I started creating something that right now I've codenamed Mike Bomb. But
I saw
um
mention of that.
yeah, but it tries to do all the things that like pretty much what I did was I fed like 3 or 4 years worth yeah, yeah, I fed about 4 or 5 years worth of notes on S bombs into an LLM and have been working over the past like 2 weeks. Because one of the challenges I've had, and I won't like call anybody out specifically, but I've opened up issues on a couple of these upstream SBOM tools, and they've come back to me with, yeah, but our customers don't want this, even though it's like part of the NTIA minimum elements. And I'm like, okay, like you're technically out of spec, but okay. um, and so there's a lot of those sorts of things, which, again, the thing that I think comes from my end is like that hurts like everything we try to do internally because like Guac and tools that ingest SBOMs all are like, okay, I now need to look at an SBOM that looks close enough to what should be real. That's not great. So that's where I started kind of building out something that can tries to actually completely conform to the NTIA minimum elements as much as it can. The challenge there is like sometimes I can't find a license, and what do you do? Like saying no assertion technically is, anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting, but neat. I feel like that's a pretty significant gap.
Yep.
Do we know who the facilitator is for this week?
Yes. Do you want the answer?
Is it me?
It is you.
Awesome. Okay. Somehow I didn't see that calendar invite, so um, I'm happy to do that. Uh, Great. Okay. Let me see. I guess I get to read the intro script now. Hello, everyone. Just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and posted to LFX and YouTube. So if you didn't like the first 5-minute conversation you had, too bad. Um, your participation in these meetings is an agreement to abide by the Cloud Native Code of Conduct, which can be found in the repo. I need at least one person to volunteer as a scribe. I think
Up.
Brant said he would,
Oh.
but with his mic off.
Yeah, I was looking for my screen, but yes, I can
Yes.
scribe.
Great. Um, okay. And if you can fill in your attendance on the meeting notes, that would be appreciated. Okay. I don't see any new names here, but if anyone really wants to say hello, they can. Community demo. Do we have something for this week? I
Not unless it was scheduled ad hoc. I see nothing on the schedule.
yeah, I didn't see anything, but I wasn't here last week. Yosemite was wonderful, but internet connectivity was zero, which was also wonderful.
Um, it I could demo the thing I just showed off in the last meeting. If no,
If
if
you want, go for it.
Sure, just give me 1 second. And let me provide a little context here as I'm pulling this up. Sorry, separately while dealing with all this, we're currently in OpenSSF dealing with a whole lot of folks spamming, being like, "Hey, on every single issue, oh, I could fix this if you pay me. Here's my AI bot," um, which is really annoying. So one of the things I've been starting to do. This is based on some recent uh, discussions in OpenSSF in one of the EU CRA related meetings. One of the things that was brought up was a lot of everybody is generating SBOMs that are like don't interoperate. A lot of them are not actually fully conformant to the spec. They are like 90% conformant to the spec, which is leading to issues of now that folks are generating these SBOMs and now saying, hey, it's not just enough to generate them, but we want to ingest these SBOMs, whether they're containers or whatever. It's leading to issues of, well, it turns out, you know, if these tools don't line up, especially with the same CPE and the same package URL, you end up with a lot of situations where I have five SBOMs. Technically, these five SBOMs like refer to the same dependency, but they all have different package URLs, which means that any scanner, any ingester is going to potentially view those as five separate, different packages, which is a huge issue. This is a huge issue in Guac because we view that as five separate nodes in the graph. Um, and we view that, and in a lot of other tools, it's like a similar sort of problem. So we end up with a lot of challenges there. So one of the things I've started to try to do is starting to assess a lot of the various tools for different things. Try to also build like essentially ground truth of, hey, here is a project that I have built in such a way in order to in order to what was I going to say? In order to know exactly when it went into the project. So without an SBOM, I know this project consists of these seven packages and only these seven packages. Or these seven packages for Go, and then it also has hooks into OpenSSL, blah, blah, blah. So I know I have these sets of things, and this is what it should look like. And then coming in with the various tools, trying to say, okay, great, can I now look at these tools and get output from them? So a lot of them do work pretty reasonable. So a lot of them, again, so the thing I found is for individual language ecosystems like Python, Node, uh, Ruby, and a few others, they're pretty much all the tools do the right thing. The only thing that might happen is some tools will look at the root of the project as a component, which is against most of the specs, but that's a separate problem. Um, so uh, the thing that also came out is a lot of the projects, what they don't do, and this is for better or worse, is for example, if I have a Node.js app and that Node.js app has some library that has hooks into OpenSSL or something like that, it often doesn't make the leap from hey, this is your npm based packages, to now here are your, Debian or RPM based packages for OpenSSL and whatever else. So most tools do not do that at all. Some tools are okay with that, but most tools don't do any of that at all. Um, as far as sort of the scanning, again, most tools will do pretty reasonable at like Python and a bunch of this other stuff. Um, some of the things that show up as like not having run, that's mostly right now. I was bringing this up before is uh, running these. Turns out disk space is at a premium right now on my laptop, and so I'm running out of disk space. So I need to spend some time clearing out stuff and rerun some of these things.
I
So,
see that we have both under and over reporting.
so the over reporting, there's a couple of different reasons for it. Sometimes the over reporting is because it's actually uh, root like the root of the project, for example, is considered as a component. It might consider it as a component. Sometimes the over reporting is also stuff that maybe my tool, like in generating ground truth, I missed. So some of that is stuff like actually the tool did go and discover I thought it was only 5 packages, but it actually made the leap to OpenSSL or whatever downstream. And sometimes it's stuff like also dev packages are often sometimes over reporting like, hey, this is actually a dev package. It's not part of the final. Sorry, this is dev dependencies. This is not part of the final package. So that's a problem. Uh, and sometimes it's and sometimes it's things like that where actually one of the things I found that I've also been ignore Mike Bomb for a second. This is just something that I will be open sourcing in the next couple of weeks. But one of the reasons why it over reports is sometimes it actually does better than the other things, but also sometimes one of the things I found that I've had some issues with is it will in some of the scans actually go a little bit too far and just start to look at, oh, on this machine you have libSSL on it, as opposed to, but the thing you just built has nothing to do with libSSL, so don't, like, it shouldn't include it. So that's one of the reasons why some of this is over-reported. There's some reasoning behind this. So like again, I have all of these reports being run via a bunch of shell scripts, and then I feed all of that information into an LLM and say, hey, tell me why you think this is happening. One of the things I found out in particular was CDXGen is actually really bad at some of this stuff, and it really does over-report on a whole lot, causing a lot of issues. The other thing too is very few tools do dependency relationships. Trivy is one, CDXGen is one. The tool I've been building out is another one. But a lot of them don't do like the full dependency trees, especially if it's part of a scan. Like npm SBOM can do a full sort of dependency tree for npm, but a lot of it doesn't. Yeah. So a lot of these things don't have dependency trees. The other thing, if I go through, a lot of the tools don't do CPE by default and stuff like that. So if I go in, there was another big thing that came out, which is one of the things was that it turns out a lot of tools don't fully conform to the Perl spec. And one of the reasons for this appears to be that the Perl spec is also a little vague and ambiguous. There are certain things that are 100% hard, fast rules, but the challenge is like a good thing was so at KubeCon there was a talk about the Perl spec requiring certain things, and that no tool actually did it correctly for Debian. And this was true, but it itself, that in that slide that they shared, actually after looking through the full spec, they also got it wrong. So this is hard. And so one of the particular things that I found interesting was a bunch of folks were starting to say in this KubeCon talk that technically you're supposed to use the Debian code name. This is ambiguous in the spec, but if you actually read through all the GitHub issues in the Perl spec, Philippe does say, oh no, we should probably be using the Debian version, but like that's in a GitHub issue. That's not in the spec itself. So that's another thing. And then anyway, I'm not going to go too deep into a bunch of this other stuff, but the other thing that I noticed, which isn't happening, is no tools are really telling you how it's actually very few tools I should say are actually telling you what it's doing to actually build the SBOM. Like, is this I wrapped your build and I looked at every little file that came in and that's how I generated your SBOM? Or no, I scanned the repo and looked for because these sorts of things from a transparency perspective really help out when somebody hands me an SBOM. If it's part of the build, I know these are the things I need to consider. If this is a best effort scan, these are the things I need to consider, and so on. And like being able to like have an SBOM tool that says, you know what, I didn't find a whole lot of information in here, so I'm going to in the various metadata of the SBOM tell you this is not going to be a complete and accurate SBOM. That's super useful, right? It's not like some SBOM is better than no SBOM, but having an SBOM that tells you what's wrong is super useful. Um, so yeah. Anyway, been playing around with this a bunch, and yeah. So
Is
some
that like
interesting
a
findings. I'll share this as well as the conformance suite I've been building in the meeting notes.
um with respect to what you were describing about how complete the SBOM was, would something like a confidence score be what you're thinking of there, or is that mostly like a human readable thing?
Um, so I think the thing that would be useful in the future is maybe a taxonomy of like 20 different techniques and saying which techniques were used and then potentially a confidence score. Right now I've been using a confidence score, but again the confidence score is just like if I looked at every single file, that's like a 1.0 or whatever, right? If I scan stuff and blah blah blah, that's a zero point 0.7. If I found no real data and I had to actually inspect on the binary and do my best to kind of look at, the ELF headers and yada yada, that's a zero point 0.4. I don't know. Like yeah, I think there's probably some stuff there. I would prefer something like a taxonomy in the future though. And
Okay. Um, Thanks. That's very interesting, although not necessarily what
yeah,
everyone would love to hear.
yeah.
Um, do the next on the agenda is review of other time zones and meetings. It looks like we probably don't have any of those. TOC meeting updates.
I attended. I am going back through my memory now to figure out what it was we talked about.
Same. I was hoping you remembered. I'm pulling up the issue.
You're very faint, Marina.
Oh, let me make sure it's on the right mic.
There we go.
Okay.
I feel like there was a healthy amount of discussion on dot project from GP. And so he kind of, I guess, did another round of introductory content on what this means and that the ask isn't for projects themselves right now to go out and implement the dot project repository in their organization, but rather that GP is going to be basically heads down working on getting these created and instrumented. And then I think we discussed some of the nuance and details around basically shifting whichever direction you want to call it, the responsibility of maintainers on projects to be able to control things. They used to have to open issues or like tickets up to perform, like changing maintainers, updating maintainers, changing logos, things like that, to be more decentralized in these dot project repositories. And so I think we discussed some of the underlying questions, like do we validate what is being put in there? How do we get reviews on things that might require like broader approval outside of just the maintainers themselves? And so there were good discussion. Again, none of this is like finalized. It's still being implemented, but I do think that that was an interesting part of the discussion of like, again, how do we stop controlling some of these processes with a subset of staff and just let maintainers control it?
It sounds like we also need to be thoughtful about which processes we want maintainers to control on their own. Okay. Do we want to roll on to project updates? For supply chain insights, we should have a wrap-up presentation in a couple weeks. Anyone have updates on security assessments? Okay. Security controls. Jen, I think you had some stuff you wanted us to look at.
Yeah, just the PR. If we have time today, just maybe we could synchronously look at a few things.
Do you?
Yeah, I can share my screen now, or if we want to reserve that for later.
Yeah.
All good. Okay. Let me see if I have it up. Yeah, I do. All right. I'm actually going to just share the deploy preview of the PR.
Fancy.
Do you all see that? Yeah, cool. So the PR is 221 on the contribute
Can you
site.
make your screen just a little narrower? Or not your screen, your window a little narrower?
Let me see if I can try. I do have a... I am not able to. I wonder if it's because I'm sharing a tab.
Okay. No problem.
Does that help if I at least make it a little bigger here?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So here is the main page that we have with an overview, just explaining to the reader where the information comes from, some of the terminology, and what to expect from each guideline. And then we have the high-level guideline families, and these come from the original CSV. And then from here, you can go to the guidelines under that particular family. And one of the main changes from the last time I showed this is we incorporated some of the feedback on having something a little bit more specific around the mappings that could be added onto as people get more interest in adding mappings to this guidance. Right now, we just have 853, but this maps to, or this takes us to another page that's a dedicated mapping to 853. So theoretically, every time we wanted to add a mapping, we could add a new page, and then we could add a new location on the individual guidance here. So for example, we have 141. So this should take me to 141 on the mapping page. Right now we're doing the relationship of relates to. There's other relationship types, but because we didn't have anything concrete to build off of, we just decided to keep it about as light as we could with loosely related, essentially. Here are the targets for 853. And then here we just have a rationale for why we mapped this piece of guidance to this particular target so that one, everyone can understand, make their own determination based on the mapping. And also we can go back and refine it if things change. So this is what we have so far for milestone 1. I think for the most part at this point, we're just looking for feedback on the work, on the possibilities for the contribution process. And then I think we have 2 more groups that we need feedback from to meet our code owners requirements on the PR. That I think I just need to give a little ping on the PR to get those going. But yeah, just is there any feedback anyone has just right off the bat?
I am not an expert in this field. I am looking at this table and I am wondering what it would look like if you reversed the mapping. So you started with the NIST requirement and then you showed how that devolved into specific cloud native security controls. I assume that's something that we could easily build later because we have all this as structured data.
Right. Definitely agree. That was something we kind of entertained, like, should we just go ahead and do that? And we decided to just like see if we can get, since we already had the first mapping,
Yeah.
get this out the door. And then as we want to add mappings, I think a reverse mapping would be extremely helpful for somebody starting from 853 and then wanting to understand, like, hey, if I applied this guidance, and I already have information about these controls, what should I look at? But definitely agree.
What gaps are there? What do I have to do myself, and what's already covered by the recommendations?
Right. I think that mapping will actually be even more interesting because we'll probably find some connections that we didn't before, because we've only looked at a small scope for the 853 controls. So there's probably a lot more mappings if we look at full 853.
That's but since you have all this in structured format, it should be easy to produce the reverse mapping later.
Right. Just another, these are in a artifact called the mapping document, just one-way mapping document. So just the pretty easy, add a new one, and it would use the same template and render a new page.
But you could also write a template that went the other way.
Right. It would probably it would reverse the source and target.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is maybe not a specific comment to the controls stuff, which is great. I really like this. We're like 6 levels deep now in the sidebar of and seeing this on the contributors site is interesting. Like it's I think it's the only place now, right, for us to publish things, which the naming is it's more for cloud native end users or consumers than contributors to CNCF. I don't know if other folks have like thoughts. Maybe there's feedback for us to provide to the projects or the TOC about, is this the right place? Like, the more and more mappings we have, the more and more content, the less and less this seems like the right destination. It'll be trivial to move it from one place to another, hopefully. But it's yeah, I don't know if others have thoughts about that.
Yeah.
I think you're bringing up a good point. I kind of wondered as I was creating it, like, One, it added tooling that was in Go, and there's no other Go tooling in this repository, so that's kind of new. So that was kind of like one thing with managing this as a mono repo that I think could end up being challenging. The other thing I was thinking of is it might be a lot for contributors because there's a lot of PRs up in this repo. So the more and more contributions that come in, I was thinking of it like from a contribution perspective. If I'm getting started here, it's like very difficult to navigate if you don't already know where you're going, essentially.
I'm not sure that adding more sites necessarily solves that problem, but yes, it definitely seems like a problem. Okay. I think we have the MCP auth. Oh, Jen, do you need us to chime in on that PR saying looks good or anything like that?
Yeah, that would be super helpful. Thank
Okay.
you.
And then MCP auth white papers. Do we have any updates?
I did not make it this week. I left them some additional feedback. I think Mike also did. But I don't think I've heard back.
Okay.
Oh, I was just gonna comment a little bit that I think it might make sense for us to so I'm going to say two things. One is more of a meta thing, which I'll start with, which is I think we might want to have or bring up to the TOC that like maybe something like having a guide for writing white papers or something like that. Because I think we keep seeing similar sorts of things where it's a lot of good content, but structured weirdly, and it's a lot of, it's a lot of just good content thrown at the page as opposed to like well scoped to start with. And what I want to make sure if folks recognize is like, we're not like when I say, hey, this whole section maybe doesn't make a lot of sense in this paper, it's not to say that the content itself is bad. It's just that, hey, if we're talking about papers for cloud native, it should be focused on cloud native, and we shouldn't, I know we brought this up in a couple of the other papers, stuff like we don't want folks to just reintroduce what is IAM for the fifth time, right? We know what IAM is. Maybe a paragraph, just kind of the high level thing, and saying, if you have more questions about generic IAM, look at this paper or whatever. Because like a lot of the stuff in that paper is more refers to just general good auth N, auth Z practices, more so than good, like what MCP changes about this. What does agentic AI change about the calculation, which should be more what the paper is on. And so I worry. So that's one thing, which is I think the higher level thing. And then there's some sort of like, specifics, which are, yeah, how do we get the paper to be more purely focused on MCP? Because, we all know what Spiffy and Spire is. We know what all these things are already. There's already papers on this. What I'm more curious about is how does the interaction of non-deterministic AI interacting with these interfaces like MCP, what are the considerations I should take from an auth N, auth Z perspective? Because if it's just do what you were doing, that's not a very interesting sort of paper.
Yeah, I think the do you have something new to say is a helpful prompt. And if you don't have something new to say, can you point to someone who's already said it well?
This might bring us back down into the split that the authors made, because
Yeah.
this is specifically about auth, and I've never really thought that there's enough new auth information in there for an entire paper. Like, it seems like it would be more useful if it was all encompassing specifically about MCP and not MCP auth.
Okay. Next on our list is issue triage. I don't see new stuff that we need to deal with. Which brings us to check-ins from partner groups. Marina, do you have anything from the technical community group you want to bring up?
No, I just want to thank everyone who took a look at that doc last week. We're sending that out to be published in blog form. So, and also if you have any feedback on the format, I think we're looking at doing another one. So let me know if this seems like it's going to be helpful, not helpful, whatever. The goal is basically in that spirit we were just talking about new content, having something new to say, not to say something new exactly, but to kind of condense a lot of the good advice that's out there into something short and small versus kind of the long, in-depth analyses that I think there are a lot of out there. So if that seems useful to folks, let me know. If it seems like it's the wrong approach, also let me know. And yeah, thanks.
Any other people connected to partner groups who want to bring anything up?
Just curious, there's a AI development experience working group talking about AI's impact. So I was wondering for security, is there any thoughts on what AI, especially agentic AI, change the security problem, the process, etc.?
I think the CNCF recently did a blog post about some of the impacts that they're seeing from AI being used to at least hunt security bugs with Project Glasswing and others. I think Mike had some useful feedback there. I don't know if you want to expound on that any further.
Yeah, I think there's two things that I think are interesting that we should generally be involved in. One is the like providing oversight and governance for projects, and what does that mean? Things like, the Project Glasswing, the Mythos stuff, and kind of like what is the sort of back and forth there. I think that I personally want to really separate out a lot of the marketing, both on the fear mongering and the reverse fear mongering. It's like, to me, this sort of thing does make a big impact, but it's like, to me, it reminds me of fuzzing. It's like fuzzing made a big impact too, but at the end of the day, fuzzing was not the like apocalypse that folks had thought it was going to be. And I don't think this is going to be the apocalypse that folks think it's going to be, where, oh my gosh, every malicious actor is going to have access to some tool that will be able to find all the vulnerabilities. Like, yeah, and if good actors have that as well, then they're just going to fix code and make code better generally, right? Where in the future, every PR is just going to be scanned completely end to end, and it's like, hey, does this introduce any security risks? No. Cool. Then it doesn't matter how many times, like whatever the model is those bugs are going to stop being as prevalent, and I think we'll go back to sort of a steady state. So that's one thing I think that's important. The second thing, which is more of a general like developer experience of, hey, I'm using AI in my normal day-to-day development practices. I think the thing that comes to mind is, and this is a thing that has come up a few times, is one is I have seen people, out at KubeCon with bypass all permissions running and just running lots of agents doing whatever they want on their machine, and that's scary and bad. These are things that I think we need to kind of work on to make it better. Like even just a day ago, I ran into an issue where Colima on my machine crashed, and Claude was like, "Oh, this is because your cache is corrupt. Let me delete all your Docker images." I said no, but the average person who just keeps hitting yes on Claude is going to eventually run into these sorts of things where Claude pushes out code, uses a secret it wasn't supposed to, which is why I really like tools like Nono and similar sandboxing tools that help out there. Because then if Claude does try to do things like this, is something that I've been playing around with, is I can create policies that say, hey, here's my GitHub token, right? Claude will have access to my GitHub token, but anything Claude uses that is not GitHub will not have access to that token. It's been sort of permissioned through a man-in-the-middle proxy. But the other thing that I can do is I can actually scope it to specific endpoints. So I can say, hey, Claude, you have access to do things like push code, pull from, like, look at my PRs, all that sort of stuff to run that. But you do not have access to the auth API endpoints. Sorry, not auth, admin API endpoint. So anything I have admin on, like, hey, this org or that org, you don't get to change permissions on it. You get a denied, right? So if you try to go out and just do your own thing, you get denied. But I think very few people are thinking about that problem. And that to me is kind of scary because, again, it reminds me of, like, you wouldn't give your intern, which, I mean, I've seen this at companies, you wouldn't give your intern a root to your prod database. Or at least you would hope you wouldn't give your intern root to the prod database because, oh, oops, I thought I was making something I thought I was just running a select query and I dropped all the tables. Like, that's really, really bad. And I think right now folks are more in the, hey, give the intern super productive, give it access to everything with no sandboxing. And so I think there's a lot of the tools out there. I think the only thing this really changes for me is there's a lot more non-determinism. So it's a lot more like human security than it was like deterministic security, where with deterministic security, you kind of say, like, hey, I know the IP addresses are always going to be in this space. So if I block something, it's always going to look like this CIDR. It's always going to look like this, this, and this. Whereas here you have an LLM that can just sort of say, I'm going to ignore all the instructions you just gave me for whatever reason and go run a different command. So how do I make sure that that command is safe? That to me is kind of the big challenge with AI. Anyway, that's my soapbox.
Brent was asking how you manage that policy and apply it.
Yeah, so there is a thing called so Nono, for folks who aren't familiar. So Nono, for folks who aren't familiar, there's Luke Hines, who is one of the folks who helped really found Sigstore. He created this tool that uses Landlock on Linux and Seatbelt on Mac, which is sort of user space level sandboxing, in order to do a bunch of these things. And so there is the way that the policies work is there's just these policy config files for Nono. One of the things I've been talking to Perko about is maybe, like, what I would love to have is actually integrate Ample, his new Ample tool, in there so that we can maybe even have runtime policy, like policy that is, because right now a lot of the stuff that's in the policy of Nono has to be done at compile time, or not compile time, like at startup time. So, like, I want to block these 5 things during the life cycle of this process, as opposed to I want it to be more dynamic, right? Where, hey, as this thing continues to run, what I want to be able to do is verify this attestation. And if the attestation is correct, cool, you're good. If the attestation isn't correct, no, you're blocked. Like, that sort of stuff, I think would be...
You'd like the policy to be able to follow the binary around rather than need to be manually configured by each person who's installing Nono.
Yep. Yep. And so Nono also has an SDK, so that's a thing I'm exploring as one of the ways to do this. Because again, I would love for us to be again. This is I think the thing that I actually use Nono for more than even the AI stuff. This is maybe a slight aside. I apologize for taking up all this time. Is I use Nono with DirEnv for folks who are familiar with that, where I can CD into a project. It automatically wraps my project in no based shims. So when I run npm install, what it'll do is I can run npm install, and npm it has access to code to go to npm js dot whatever. It has access to a bunch of other things, but it doesn't have access to any of my secrets. It doesn't have access to um, when I install something via npm. It doesn't have access to anything that uh, like when I run a post install script, it can download stuff, but it can't post. For example, like I block post HTTP requests and that sort of thing. So when I run npm install, if I download a script and that script tries to go and leak my secrets, all of those things get blocked in two ways. One is it blocks reads outside of the project and outside of a couple of specific npm and binary sort of repos. It has block write to a bunch of repos and that sort of stuff. So it's only allow listed to a handful of things, which I think is also super important. And like again, where I think we should be also focusing our efforts is not just in the AI security space, but like how can we make these tools transparent? So whether you're a human making the dumb, making the silly mistake, or you're the AI making the silly mistake, it gets blocked either way.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. That's interesting. I also share some about the CNCF plot blog. That's probably the one you referred to, right? That's
Yeah.
and so there's another application called CodeGuard, and that's basically putting rules engine so if you use agentic AI to develop code, it kind of do a scan to make sure anything that's kind of violating the policy, the rules will be rejected. In a way, reduce number of possible vulnerabilities in the bug. I look at the rules, at least the rules, you can actually find corresponding rules, or I don't know, you can rule policy controls in the CAPAC framework list. I was wondering if CodeGuard does it, is it feasible to use the whole CAPAC database, the framework? If you apply all of them, would that make it more secure, the code base?
So I think it depends. Like the way I sort of view it is generally, so there's a bunch of issues, right? One is if you apply all the thing I found with a lot of these sorts of tools is without additional context, you end up either sort of like tying both hands behind your back and you kind of make it almost impossible for the thing to do anything productive. But if you sort of go the opposite direction, then uh, if you go the opposite direction, you also run into similar things.
What
So
is
like I guess the thing that I like for me at least, what I care more about is like there's two things. Like I kind of separate these two things. One is like OpenGrep and a lot of these other security linters already do this sort of thing. So like why not just kind of do that? Um, and then in addition to that, uh, like if that's already the case, like what is I guess the thing I would probably need to read a little bit more on regarding project the code guard stuff is like, what is it actually sort of doing that the other tools currently aren't, right? Like, because could I just run linters and tell the agent to run the linters, and so every single time that sort of thing happens, right? I'd be curious if that's
It sounds like you're asking, is this different from SAST in some way?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, is this is this different from SAST? Because like at least the initial read is it's just SAST that you've combined, and you said, "Hey, AI, run the SAST." That's not to say that it's not doing like hooking in a couple of different places to make it better, but yeah, I'd be interested.
It'd be interesting to have a SaaS project to give a presentation about it. Are they using the whole Capac or what?
Yeah, because like like the thing that I know we have like one of the tools that's available for CNCF projects, the one that we have a partnership with, that tool, behind the scenes, all it does is it runs open grep, it runs various linters, and then hands that to the LLM to then provide additional context to then help resolve sort of like, hey, if I ran AI generated code, how do I make sure that it's doing reasonable things? Whereas I think tools like, just to kind of compare to something like No is more like, when running the AI agent, you can't go out and do these other things. So this seems more like, hey, AI generated code. How do we make sure that that code itself that it's generating is reasonably safe and secure? Whereas tools like No are more focused on, how do I make sure that the agent doesn't try to do something weird? Like, oh, and when you asked it to write some code, it decided to go and
So
read
it
a bunch
seems
of
like
your secrets.
No is a bit more focused on protecting the credentials and the tools you have in your development environment, protecting Mike Lieberman from the AI tools. Whereas it looks like CodeGuard is more focused on, how do I protect, say, the Kubernetes code base from, malicious code submissions.
Yeah, I think so. What you just described, Evan.
Okay. I'm just trying to sort of summarize, because we are basically at the end of the meeting time. So and I don't know if we have any demos for next week. But I wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to get that scheduled if we've got anything. We could try to reach out to Luke and see if he wants to give a presentation about No. I'm not hearing resounding enthusiasm for that, so maybe we'll keep it open and see what pops up. Okay, well, it's 10:55. I think it's time for us to finish the meeting. See you all.
Bye.